The night was cold enough to bite. Wind howled through the alleyways like a wolf with nowhere to go, carrying bits of trash and sorrow with it. City lights flickered above, casting sharp shadows that stretched over the cracked sidewalks and the graffiti-covered walls. Cars passed without slowing, their drivers cocooned in warmth and distraction, their eyes sliding over the shadows where the forgotten huddled. Among those shadows, a young woman moved slowly, her arms wrapped around her belly, her breath visible in the icy air. Her name was Amara. She wore 3 layers of mismatched clothes, none of which were enough to keep the chill at bay. Her shoes had holes, her socks were damp, and every step seemed to echo in her bones. But despite her frailty, there was a quiet defiance in the way she walked, chin up, eyes forward. Her belly heavy with life, strained against her coat. Strangers who passed her muttered or stared. Some pitied, some judged. But no one stopped. And still Amara walked. She had no home. Not anymore. No family to return to. No shelter to welcome her. She had been on the streets for months now, each night a test of will and endurance. She knew the routine: find a semi-safe spot before the shelters closed, before the worst of the night settled in. Claim a dry piece of concrete, maybe near a vent or beneath an overpass where the wind wasn't so vicious. Hold tight to her bag and hope to make it until morning. But Amara was not broken. She whispered to her belly every night. She told stories of sun-drenched fields, of warm kitchens, of laughter and lullabies. She spoke of a future that was kinder than the present, of a world that still had pockets of goodness. "You're not just a baby," she would say, cradling her stomach with trembling fingers. "You're my reason. You're going to change everything." She believed it with the kind of faith only desperation can birth. This child, yet unnamed, was her lighthouse in the dark. Her hope. Her miracle. She had left the past behind not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. There was too much pain back there. But the future? The future was unwritten. It shimmered just out of reach, golden and blurred. And her baby, she felt, would be the one to write it. Maybe not for the whole world. Maybe not with fame or fanfare. But for her. For them. People crossed the street when they saw her coming. Her eyes, once bright, now scanned alleys for food wrappers or discarded bottles. Hunger was constant, as natural now as breathing. But she never begged. Not out loud. Only in her heart, to the universe, to God, for safety, for warmth, for one more day. A neon sign above a late-night diner buzzed, casting a pink glow over her face. She paused and looked in. Families sat inside, laughing, eating fries, sipping cocoa. She stood outside, unnoticed, her hand pressed against the glass. A tear slid down her cheek before she wiped it away. She didn't blame them. They didn't know her story. How could they? But she whispered to the child again. "You'll never stand outside the window. You'll sit at the table. You'll be seen." Every step she took, every cold night endured, every pang of hunger, it was all for that promise. For the small life growing inside her who kicked when she hummed lullabies, who seemed to flutter at the sound of her voice. For the soul she believed was special. Destined. Greater than the life they had now. Even as she crouched into a corner beside a dumpster, pulling a thin blanket over her legs and using her coat to shield her belly from the wind, her heart beat with quiet courage. Even as the world looked away, she looked forward. Amara didn't know how or when. But she believed with all her being that something extraordinary would come of this child. That maybe, just maybe, she was carrying not just a baby, but the spark of a new beginning. Amara hadn't always lived in the cold. There was a time when walls surrounded her, where a roof overhead offered some illusion of safety. But even inside those walls, warmth was rare. Her earliest memories weren't of lullabies or birthday cakes, but of shouting, doors slamming, plates breaking. Her stepfather's voice, thick with alcohol and venom, barking her name like a curse. And her mother? She was there, physically. But her spirit was somewhere else. Lost long before Amara understood what love or protection meant. From the moment her mother remarried, everything changed. The man she chose was the kind that knew how to smile in public and snarl in private. To the neighbors he was hardworking and friendly. To Amara he was a storm, unpredictable, cold and cruel. She learned to walk softly, speak less, and disappear when the air turned tense. She cleaned before she was asked, avoided eye contact, and knew better than to cry when the belt came out. Tears only made it worse. Her mother watched. Always watched. But never interfered. She would twist her hands in her lap, look down at her tea, and whisper that things would be better soon. But they never were. School had been her only escape. Not because she loved math or books, but because it meant hours away from home. It meant teachers who sometimes smiled at her, classmates who, at least occasionally, asked her name. That's where she met him, Isaiah. Quiet, gentle, with eyes like rain. He saw her. They weren't loud about their love. They didn't go to dances or hold hands in front of everyone. But when he walked her home, he held her books and listened. When she cried once during lunch, he didn't ask why. He just sat beside her, close enough to remind her she wasn't invisible. It was the kind of love that felt like breathing for the first time. They planned to run away one day. Nothing dramatic, just a little apartment, 2 jobs, a corner of the world that was theirs. But the world has a cruel sense of timing. A rainy night. A speeding car. A phone call that shattered her only hope. Isaiah was gone just like that. Her grief was silent. There was no space for it in her mother's house. And then the sickness began, the nausea, the dizziness, the missed cycle. A small pink line on a test in the pharmacy bathroom confirmed it. She was pregnant. When she told her mother, there was no gasp of surprise. Just cold silence. Her stepfather didn't even pretend to be calm. He screamed, accused her of ruining everything, of being just like her mother. He called her names she had heard before, but never with such venom. That night, he threw her suitcase down the stairs before throwing her out the door. Her mother didn't stop him. No goodbye. No hug. No whisper of support. She had nothing but a backpack, 2 changes of clothes, a half-eaten granola bar, and the beginnings of a life inside her. She wandered. She sat in a park for hours, her hands shaking. She thought of calling someone, anyone. But there was no one left. Friends had drifted after Isaiah died. Teachers had too many students to notice. And the system? It had failed her long before. So she walked. 4 miles. Until the suburbs disappeared and the city swallowed her. The grief for Isaiah was still raw. The loss of her mother cut like a blade. But the baby was something else. It was hers. Untouched by the cruelty of the world. Untouched by fists, by cold stares, by slammed doors. She whispered apologies to her belly each night, promising better days. It wasn't fair. None of it. But Amara had learned long ago that fairness was a luxury. What she had now was resolve. She would survive. Not because she had the strength, but because she had to. Because her child deserved a world brighter than the one she'd escaped. And she still carried Isaiah in her heart. In the way she looked at the stars. In the softness of her voice. In the tiny heartbeat that echoed within her, steady and defiant, just like his love. Every morning, Amara woke up with the same thought: protect the baby. It didn't matter if the cardboard beneath her was soaked from the night's rain or if the food in her stomach was nothing but a stale crust of bread. She rubbed her belly, whispering the same promise she'd made since the night she was thrown out. I've got you. I'll keep you safe. The city was a harsh, breathing beast. It didn't slow down for anyone, especially not for a pregnant girl with nowhere to go. Amara learned to move before dawn, before the shopkeepers opened their doors and began shooing her away. She knew which dumpsters behind which bakeries still held something edible, which parks had water fountains that actually worked, and which bus stops had overhead shelters that gave some protection from the cold. Each day was a chessboard of survival. Where to sit so the police wouldn't hassle her. Where to rest so no one would try to steal her shoes. Where to hide when the streets turned mean after dark. The alleys were full of stories. Some whispered, some screamed. There was Jonah, the old vendor who sold roasted corn near the market. He never asked her name, but he sometimes handed her the burnt or unsold pieces when the crowd thinned. He muttered something about how his sister had been just like her, and would look away when she thanked him. Then there was Binta, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and quicker hands. She'd been on the streets for a decade, and she made it clear to Amara that kindness was rare currency. You want to survive, Binta warned one night, chewing on something unidentifiable. Don't ever look too weak. Even when you are. Still, she shared a blanket with Amara once, and that counted for something. But it wasn't all near misses and half-broken kindness. There were nights Amara barely made it. Nights she'd press herself against a wall, wrapping her thin coat around her stomach like armor, praying the drunk man across the road wouldn't notice her. Nights she'd sleep in 15-minute bursts, eyes half open, ears trained on footsteps that didn't belong. She avoided shelters. Some were full. Others had rules she couldn't follow, or people who stared too long and asked too many questions. Once, a man there tried to touch her stomach. She never went back. As her belly grew, so did her fear. Every ache in her back, every kick from within made her worry. Not yet, she'd whisper to the child. Stay in there. Just a little longer. The streets were no place to bring a baby into the world. But the world didn't wait, and she could feel time slipping. Still, through all of it, Through the hunger, the danger, the loneliness, hope clung to her like a second skin. She imagined her baby laughing. She imagined a tiny hand wrapping around her finger. She imagined singing lullabies beneath a roof, even if the walls were thin and the lights flickered. She kept a notebook, scavenged from a bin, and wrote letters to her child at night. "I don't know if it's a boy or a girl," she scribbled once, "but I know you're strong. I know you've already lived through more than most do in a lifetime. I promise to make it worth it." And despite the filth and the noise, she smiled when the baby kicked. It was proof that someone still believed in her. Sometimes she sat on the curb and watched the world go by. Mothers pushing strollers, students laughing into phones, businessmen yelling at taxis. They didn't see her. Not really. But that was okay. Because one day she told herself she and her baby would walk these streets again. Clean, safe, fed. They would matter. And on the hardest nights, when the rain poured and the winds howled through the cracks of her makeshift shelter, she would press her hand to her stomach and whisper, "We're still here. That's enough. For now." It started with a banana. Left beside her while she slept on the cold steps of an abandoned shopfront, the fruit sat there in a little napkin as if placed with care. Amara blinked at it, unsure if it was a dream. But it wasn't. It was real, ripe, and sweet, one of the first fresh things she'd eaten in days. She ate slowly, tears welling in her eyes, not just because of the taste, but because someone, somewhere, had seen her and chosen to care. The next night it was a wrapped sandwich. After that, a flask of warm porridge with honey. Always left silently while she slept. No note, no face, just food, clean, nourishing, and gentle. Amara didn't know who it was. She started pretending to sleep, hoping to catch a glimpse. But whoever it was moved like mist, unseen and careful. She imagined it was the old vendor Jonah, though the hand that tied the napkin looked neater, more delicate. Maybe it was one of the students she saw walking past each day. Or maybe it was someone who understood what it meant to be invisible and pregnant in a world that didn't slow down for suffering. But even small miracles couldn't stop the toll her body was taking. Her feet ached constantly, swollen from walking and standing. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold onto her notebook. The baby was growing fast and her body struggled to keep up. One evening, just as the streetlights flickered to life, she collapsed while crossing the park near the central square. The world blurred. Voices echoed in her ears. People shouted. Someone touched her wrist, checked her pulse. Then nothing. She woke in a white room, too clean, too quiet. A nurse hovered nearby, surprise flashing across her face as Amara stirred. "You fainted," the woman said gently. "You're severely dehydrated. We need to run some tests." But Amara's heart raced. Clinics meant records. Records meant social workers, questioning, judgment, the risk of losing her baby. She didn't trust systems. Not after the way they ignored her bruises when she begged for help. Not after they sided with her stepfather when he said she was lying. She slipped out while the nurse stepped away to get water, cradling her belly as she vanished back into the city. That night, hunched beneath a sheltering tree in the corner of a quiet alley, Amara took out her notebook. It was ragged, pages slightly damp from the rain, but it was hers. Her truth lived in that book. She began to write, as she always did when the pain in her ribs made sleep impossible. "Dear little one, I'm sorry about today. I tried to be strong but my legs gave out. I promise I'm okay now. I'm eating again. Someone out there, someone kind, they keep feeding us. I don't know who they are. But I whisper, thank you into the wind every time I eat. You're kicking more now. It feels like fluttering wings. Like you're telling me you're alive and I need to keep going. I will. For you. Always for you. Someday I'll read these letters to you. And you'll know that even in the dirt, even in the cold, love kept us warm. My love for you. And maybe there's two. Whoever keeps leaving the food. Maybe that's love too." Her handwriting was shaky, her fingers stiff with cold, but her words were full of warmth. The letters became her ritual. They gave her something stable in a world that spun too fast. She wrote about what the baby might be like, a girl with her mother's eyes or a boy with the kind heart of her first love. She wrote promises, that she would protect them, teach them kindness, and remind them every day that they were born from strength. More food came. Soup in a thermos. Crackers. Dried mangoes. Someone even left a thick wool scarf once, wrapped like a gift with no name. She began to think of the mystery giver as a guardian angel. She sometimes whispered into the dark, "Thank you," hoping it reached them. Still, her body continued to weaken. Nights were longer. Storms came. She couldn't run anymore. Just walk. Slowly. Carefully. Sometimes she had to sit down every few minutes just to breathe. But she kept writing. kept whispering to the child growing inside her. Kept believing that kindness, even the hidden kind, could change everything. And deep inside, despite everything she had suffered, hope flickered stubbornly, just like that first banana, left without a word but full of life. The sky cracked open with the roar of thunder, and the rain began to fall in thick, angry sheets. Amara, drenched and trembling, crouched beneath the concrete skeleton of a highway overpass. The space was dark, echoing with the sound of traffic above and the wild pounding of the storm around her. Water poured from every crack and crevice, pooling around her bare feet. She had wrapped her scarf tightly around her belly, trying to keep the baby warm. But the storm was merciless. Then the first wave hit. It started as a dull ache in her lower back, something she had felt before. But this was deeper, sharper, like something trying to split her from the inside. She sucked in a breath and clutched her side. Seconds later, another wave crashed through her, stronger, longer. Her body seized with pain. She knew. The baby was coming. No, she whispered to herself, her breath catching in her throat. Not now. Please, not here. She tried to move, crawling toward a pile of old cardboard boxes and plastic she had stacked for insulation. But her knees buckled. Her body, exhausted and malnourished, was barely holding on. The next contraction came like a tidal wave. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear alone, it was agony, raw and primal. A scream that echoed off the wet concrete walls, swallowed by the storm and the noise of cars overhead. No one heard. No one came. Thunder exploded above her like a war drum, and the wind whipped her soaked hair across her face. Her hands shook as she tried to reach for the scarf, for something, anything, to grip. Pain spread through her hips, her spine. She doubled over, sobbing now, the cold mixing with the fire of labor. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Not just from pain, but from everything. Memories struck her like flashes of lightning. Her mother turning her face away when she begged to stay. Her stepfather shouting that she was a disgrace. The boy she loved. His smile, his hands holding hers, the moment they both dreamed of something better. The accident. The silence afterward. She thought of the letters she'd written. Her promises. Her baby's little fluttering kicks. Was this how it would all end? Under a bridge, alone, with the rain washing away her last hopes? Her entire body shook now. The pain rolled in with barely a pause. She couldn't stop the screaming. She wanted to beg for help, but her voice had become a ragged whisper. Her legs wouldn't move. Her body was giving out. She pressed one hand against the soaked concrete and the other around her belly, as if holding the baby in place might save them both. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. This can't be it, she gasped. Not like this. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the warmth of the food left by the stranger. The quiet moments writing to her baby. The kindness she had clung to. But it all felt so far away now. The pain was unbearable. It stole the air from her lungs. Lightning cracked again, so bright it lit up the entire underpass for one surreal second. Then came a silence so heavy it felt like the world itself had stopped. She slumped forward, barely conscious. Her fingers grazed the edge of her notebook, soaked and ruined by the rain. She couldn't open it. Couldn't write the final letter. Her last thought, as her vision blurred, was of her baby's face, imagined but vivid. Eyes full of light. A voice that hadn't yet cried. She whispered one final plea into the storm. Please, not my baby, not my baby. And then the pain swallowed her whole. The rain still poured like heaven itself was weeping, drumming violently against the stretched plastic tarp that now covered the small shelter beneath the overpass. Amara lay sprawled on the cold concrete, her body racked with exhaustion, her cries softened to mere whimpers. The storm masked everything, her pain, her desperation, her isolation. But then, out of the shadows, a man emerged. He moved with practiced urgency, his face weathered, his clothes soaked, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes scanned the scene in one glance. Amara's twisted posture, the signs of advanced labor, the puddle of blood already forming beneath her. He dropped to his knees beside her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. I've got you, he said, his voice low but firm, almost too calm for the chaos around them. Amara's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she thought he was a hallucination, the spirit of someone sent to guide her into the next world. But his grip was warm, his touch real. She tried to speak but only a groan escaped. The man glanced upward. We don't have much time. He reached into his bag, pulling out a small flashlight, towels, gloves, a clean cloth, all packed and ready. This wasn't the first time he had helped someone in crisis. But this was the first time in a long while. The past hung over him like a second storm, but he pushed it aside. "I'm Elijah," he said quickly, already at work. "I used to be a doctor. You and your baby, we're going to get through this." Amara's head rolled to the side, and she caught the glint of something like hope in his eyes. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that anyone could save her now. The next contraction hit like a hammer. She screamed, her entire body lifting off the ground in agony. Elijah held her hand and talked her through it. "You're doing great. You're strong. Just a little more." Lightning flared again, bathing everything in a ghostly white glow. Thunder followed, rattling the ground. Elijah didn't flinch. His hands worked steadily, guiding Amara, checking her progress, coaching her through the storm and her fear. Between pushes, Amara gasped for breath, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was going to die." "You're not dying today," Elijah replied. "You're bringing life into this world. Stay with me." Another push. Another scream. Elijah wiped his brow. He remembered nights like this, hospital nights, before everything fell apart. Before the patient he couldn't save. Before the lawsuit. Before he lost his license, his name, his belief in himself. But tonight wasn't about him. It was about her. About this child. Finally, with a primal cry and a final push, the baby slipped into Elijah's waiting hands. The rain seemed to slow for one moment. A stillness fell over the overpass. Elijah cradled the newborn gently, checking the cord, clearing the mouth and nose. The baby was perfectly formed, tiny fingers, delicate features, but motionless. No cry. Amara's eyes widened in terror. She tried to sit up but collapsed. Why isn't he crying? Elijah worked quickly, clearing the baby's airway, rubbing its back. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, little one. You're safe. You're here." Then, a flash of lightning tore across the sky with a deafening crack, illuminating the entire overpass like day. In that brilliant, blinding second, the baby still lay silent in Elijah's arms. Time itself seemed to freeze. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. And then, nothing. No sound. No cry. Just the pounding of the rain and the silent weight of fear. She reached for her child, tears streaming down her face. "Please, please." Elijah's hands trembled now. "No, not this time, not this one." And still the baby didn't cry. The storm raged on above them, the relentless downpour mixing with the electric energy of the sky. Amara lay on the cold concrete, eyes wide, her heart pounding in her chest. She could barely hold her breath, still waiting for the sound that would tell her everything was going to be okay. Elijah, trembling slightly as he cradled the tiny baby in his arms, leaned in closer, his face drawn with concern. There was a suffocating silence that hung between them, the sound of the rain the only thing she could hear now. Her fingers, numb with cold, reached out toward her baby, but she was too weak, too disoriented to think clearly. "Why isn't he crying?" Amara whispered through choked breaths, her voice cracking with disbelief. Elijah, normally steady, seemed to falter for a moment. His eyes were locked on the still form of the baby in his hands shaking as he continued to rub the child's back, coaxing life into the small, fragile body. "I don't know," Elijah murmured under his breath, but then he caught himself, trying to steady his hands. Just wait." The silence pressed on, suffocating her. Every second felt like an eternity, each one more unbearable than the last. Amara closed her eyes, her mind circling back to all the pain she had endured. The years of abuse. The betrayal. Her hopelessness. And now, the quietest night of her life, spent in the shadows of a broken city, fighting for her unborn child, only for it to end in this suffocating stillness. The baby, swaddled in a makeshift cloth, remained motionless in Elijah's arms. She could hear the thunder rumbling in the distance, but her own heart drowned out all other sound. Then a sharp crack of lightning illuminated the world for a split second, making everything glow in an eerie, almost ethereal light. And then, just as quickly as the silence had taken hold, it shattered. The baby's first cry, strong, piercing and filled with life, echoed across the streets, a sound that seemed to ripple through the very air. It was a sound that carried with it the power of 1,000 storms, the energy of a miracle. Amara's heart leapt in her chest. She gasped, her face flooding with tears. She stared at the tiny form in Elijah's hands as the baby let out another wail, loud and undeniable. It was the sound of survival, of resilience, of a new life beginning. The storm outside, the darkness, the years of suffering, all faded away in that single moment. Amara reached for her baby, her hands trembling. "He's alive, my baby's alive." Elijah looked down, his eyes soft with amazement. He placed the baby in her arms, the small bundle feeling impossibly light, but also impossibly full of promise. The warmth of the child's skin against hers made everything else fade into the background, as if the world had just shifted into a new, brighter existence. The baby's cries reverberated through the streets, echoing off the cracked pavement and reaching into the hearts of everyone who could hear. It wasn't just the sound of a newborn, it was a call to the broken city, a cry that spoke of hope when there had been none. One by one, figures began to emerge from the shadows of the alleyways and doorways, drawn to the sound like moths to a flame. First, it was the old vendor from the corner who had seen Amara many times, her gaunt face never leaving his memory. Then, a couple of homeless men who had shared a fleeting moment of kindness with her over the months. A young woman who used to sit near the bus stop, now clutching a coat to her chest. They all came rushing toward the sound of the baby's cries, their faces filled with confusion, curiosity, and then something more. Amara barely noticed them as they surrounded her, their expressions softening at the sight of her holding the child, the baby's cries loud and full of life. The vendor, eyes wide with disbelief, wrapped a blanket around the tiny newborn, gently tucking it closer to Amara's chest. The young woman brought over a container of food, warm bread and cheese, as if trying to offer more than just sustenance, but something far deeper, a gesture of humanity, of shared strength. A man who had once been a police officer, bent down to meet Amara's eyes, his face filled with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "You made it," he said simply, his voice thick with something unspoken. And yet, it wasn't just the kindness of strangers that filled the space. There was a weight to the moment, a heaviness that Amara could feel deep in her bones. The past, the years of abuse, the loneliness, the betrayal, suddenly seemed so far away. In its place was something new, a community, a sense of belonging, of being seen. For the first time in so long she wasn't alone. The baby's cries softened into gentle whimpers, and Amara pulled him close, her heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of love. She could feel him breathing against her chest, a sign of life, of strength. Strength she had always known was inside her, but had struggled to find until now. "His name is Zuberi," she whispered to herself, tears falling freely now, mixing with the rain. Zuberi. Strength. The crowd that had gathered didn't need to hear her words to understand. They had already felt it, the miracle, the new life, the rebirth of hope. Amara, her baby in her arms, smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. This was a new beginning, not just for her but for everyone who had witnessed this moment. The storm outside still raged, but it no longer felt as threatening. In fact, it felt almost beautiful. It was the backdrop to something greater, a moment where one cry changed everything. Zuberi, her son, was the miracle they had all been waiting for. And no one in that moment would ever forget the cry that echoed through the streets, reminding them that even in the darkest hours, life could find its way. Amara was no longer a mere shadow of herself. The pain that had once clung to her like a second skin began to loosen, as if the universe itself had decided to grant her a second chance. The cold streets, the alleyways, the nights filled with fear and loneliness, all seemed like memories of someone else's life. It was hard to reconcile who she was now with the woman she had been just days before. The shelter was nothing like the streets. It was warm, clean, and filled with the gentle hum of conversation, the soft clink of dishes, the laughter of children. When Amara first stepped through the door, her legs trembled beneath her. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, yet she was also filled with a profound sense of peace. There was no more running, no more looking over her shoulder. For the first time in so long she could rest. The staff at the women's shelter were kind, empathetic, and quick to offer support. They placed her in a room with a cot for her and Zuberi, tucked away in a quiet corner. A nurse checked on her regularly, making sure her body recovered from the strain of her pregnancy and the trauma she'd endured. But it wasn't just the physical healing that mattered now, it was the emotional support that made her feel whole again. The other women in the shelter, survivors of their own battles, began to reach out to her, welcoming her into a community that understood hardship. Her baby Zuberi thrived. He was strong and healthy, his cries filling the air in a way that reminded her that despite the darkness, there was always light. Each time he cried, it was as if the world itself bent to his will, demanding that everything bad make way for something good. She had named him Zuberi for a reason, because his very existence, his survival, symbolized strength. She held him close every night, singing softly as he drifted to sleep, marveling at his tiny hands and the way his eyes would flutter open to meet hers. There was something about him, something in the way he looked at her, that made her believe the world was finally on her side. But it wasn't just Zuberi who was finding a new life. Amara began to find her own purpose in this new chapter. One of the shelter staff members, a woman named Grace, approached her one morning, a kind smile on her face. "You know, Amara," Grace began, "you have a gift. You've been through so much, but you're still standing, still fighting. I think you could help other women here, teach them how to rebuild, how to believe in themselves again." Amara hesitated, unsure of what she could possibly offer. But Grace's encouragement gave her the courage to try. She started helping the other women in the shelter, offering her time and wisdom. She wasn't a professional counselor or a therapist, but she had something far more valuable: experience. She had lived through the darkest parts of life, and somehow she had survived. She knew the power of hope, and she was ready to share that with others. It started small, helping women prepare meals for their families, offering comfort when someone was feeling down, sharing her own story when others needed to hear it. She found that her words had a unique power to heal. As she spoke about her past, the pain she had endured, the strength she had found in her child, the other women listened. They saw themselves in her, and they began to see a way out of the darkness. Amara wasn't just helping the women around her. She was helping herself too. Every conversation, every small act of kindness she extended to another woman, made her feel stronger, more rooted in the present. It wasn't about the past anymore, it was about the future. One evening, as she sat in the common room with a group of women, Zuberi in her arms, she listened as one of the women, a young girl named Sarah, spoke about her own struggles. Sarah had been through a series of abusive relationships, and she felt as though she would never escape the cycle of violence and despair. "I don't know if I can ever get out of this," Sarah said, tears welling up in her eyes. Amara placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know it feels impossible," she said softly. "But you can get out. I was once in your shoes. I thought I had no way out, but here I am. And here you are. We're not alone. Not anymore." Sarah looked at her, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But how? How did you survive?" Amara smiled gently, her heart swelling with emotion as she gazed at Zuberi, who was now peacefully asleep in her arms. "I survived because of him," she said. "He's the reason I fought. He's the reason I'm here today. Strength isn't just something you find in the world, it's something that grows inside of you, when you decide you're not going to let the world take it away from you." Sarah wiped away her tears, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "Do you really think I can do that? Do you think I can find that strength?" Amara nodded, her voice firm with conviction. "I know you can. We all can. It's not easy and it won't be fast, but if we help each other, we can make it. You're not alone." The words she spoke felt true, and she could see that they resonated deeply with Sarah. And in that moment, Amara realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. She had found purpose not only for herself, but for others who had been where she once was. Zuberi stirred in her arms and she looked down at him, her heart swelling with love. This little boy had changed everything. He had given her the strength to keep going, to rebuild, to find her place in this world. Her journey had been long and painful, but now, with Zuberi by her side, she knew she had found her calling, to help others find their strength, just as she had. Amara's new life had only just begun, but already she could feel the strength coursing through her veins. It was the same strength she had passed on to Zuberi, and now it was her gift to give to others. And so, the cycle of healing continued, and with each woman she helped, Amara knew she was one step closer to healing herself. She had found a new family, a new purpose, and with it, a future filled with hope and love. A year had passed since Amara's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. In that time, the pain and uncertainty that had once defined her existence had slowly transformed into something new. Something beautiful. Something strong. She stood in front of a crowd of well-dressed individuals in the grand ballroom of a charity gala, a stark contrast to the life she had once known. The glittering chandeliers above her illuminated the room with soft, warm light, and the hum of conversation filled the air. The tables were adorned with elegant centerpieces, and the sound of clinking glasses mixed with light classical music. Yet, amidst all the beauty and sophistication, Amara felt something much deeper, an overwhelming sense of gratitude and humility. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone, but her heart was steady. She had been asked to speak at the event, a charity gala for women and children who had faced similar struggles to her own. It was a moment she had never thought possible. Just a year ago, she had been lost in the streets, her life hanging by a thread, uncertain of whether she or her unborn child would survive the night. But now she was standing here not as a victim of circumstance, but as a symbol of strength, resilience, and hope. Zuberi, now a lively and curious 1-year-old, was safely nestled in her arms, sleeping soundly as she prepared to speak. He was the embodiment of her journey, her joy, and her reason for everything she had fought for. His small hands curled around the fabric of her dress, and she smiled, her heart swelling with love as she looked down at him. She had named him Zuberi, which meant strength in Swahili, and every day he reminded her of what true strength was, the quiet, unspoken power that could change the world. Taking a deep breath, Amara began to speak. Her voice was steady, though there was an undeniable emotion in her words. She looked out at the audience, her eyes scanning the faces of people who had supported her, believed in her, and worked to make sure women like her would never have to face the same struggles again. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and sincerity. "I am truly honored to be standing here tonight with all of you sharing my story. Feels surreal, to be honest. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined being in a place like this. I was lost, wandering the streets, trying to survive each day, each hour, each minute. I was pregnant, alone, and afraid. I didn't know how I would make it through the night, let alone to a place like this." She paused for a moment, her throat tightening as the memories of those dark days resurfaced. The endless nights spent searching for shelter, the hunger, the fear, the cold that seeped into her bones. But then she remembered the turning point, the cry that had changed everything. "It was the cry of my son Zuberi that saved us," Amara continued, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "That cry. The one that echoed through the streets when I thought all hope was lost. It wasn't just the cry of a baby. It was a cry of strength, of life, of survival. That moment was the turning point in my life. It was the moment I realized that no matter how dark things got, there was always light, there was always hope. And it was my baby who showed me that." Amara's voice broke slightly as she spoke, but she continued, feeling the weight of her words. "Before that moment, I had given up on the idea of hope. I thought the world had forgotten about me. I thought that no one cared. But that cry, it was like a beacon in the night, calling people who had once ignored me, who had once passed me by, to stop and see me, to hear me, to help me. It was the sound that brought warmth to my cold, lonely world. It was a reminder that sometimes, the quietest moments, those that seem insignificant, can change everything." The audience sat in rapt attention, listening to her words with a quiet reverence. Amara felt the presence of the people who had helped her along the way, and her heart swelled with gratitude. But there was one person in particular she needed to thank. "And there's someone else I want to thank tonight," she said, her voice steady now, filled with conviction. "Someone who changed my life in ways they may never fully understand. Someone who appeared out of nowhere when I needed them most. I'm speaking of the mysterious doctor who helped deliver my son in the rain that night. I don't know who they are, and I don't know if I'll ever see them again. But I will never forget what they did for me. For Zuberi. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask questions. They just helped. And in that act of kindness they gave me my life back." She paused again, looking down at Zuberi, who was now awake, his bright eyes blinking up at her. She kissed the top of his head and continued. "Without that doctor I wouldn't be here today. Without them, Zuberi wouldn't be here today. And without Zuberi, I wouldn't have found the strength to keep going. It's a miracle that I'm standing here today, but it's also a testament to the unseen strength we all have inside us. Sometimes, we don't realize how strong we are until we are faced with the hardest challenges of our lives. And sometimes, it takes a cry, a moment of desperation, a simple act of kindness, to remind us of that strength." Her voice softened as she finished her speech. "We all have strength inside of us. We all have the power to change our circumstances, to rise above our struggles, and to make a difference. I stand here tonight as proof of that. And I stand here tonight because of the love and support I've received from all of you. You have shown me what community, what kindness, truly means." Amara looked out at the crowd, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The people in this room weren't just supporters, they were a lifeline. And together, they had created a space where women like her could thrive. I promise you all, I will continue to use my story, my strength, to help others who are still fighting. I will keep working to give women like me the chance to find hope, to find a way out of the darkness. Because if I can do it, if Zuberi and I can do it, so can they." The room erupted in applause. Amara smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks as she held Zuberi close. She had come so far, and the road ahead was still long. But with the support of those around her, and the strength that had brought her this far, she knew there was nothing she couldn't face. As the applause died down, Amara spoke her final words. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for believing in me, for believing in Zubri. And thank you for never giving up on those who need help the most. Together we can make miracles happen." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling in the hearts of everyone present. In that moment, Amara knew that her journey had only just begun. Her story, her strength, and her son's cry would continue to inspire others, and together, they would create a future where no one had to fight alone. The end of one chapter marked the beginning of another, and Amara was ready to keep writing her story. Amara sat by the window, the soft golden light of the afternoon sun streaming into the room, casting a warm glow across the space. The sun filtered through the blinds, creating gentle patterns on the walls. The room, though simple, felt peaceful, a stark contrast to the cold, harsh world she had once known. The scent of fresh linens and the faint smell of flowers from a nearby vase filled the air, grounding her in the present moment. She looked over at Zubri, now a year old, sound asleep in his crib. His small chest rose and fell with each peaceful breath, his tiny hands curled in slumber. He looked so serene, so at peace. The innocence of his sleep was a far cry from the chaos and fear they had once lived through. A soft smile tugged at her lips as she watched him. He was her miracle, her reason for everything. Zubri had brought her not just joy, but a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and a sense of hope for the future. She glanced down at the old, worn notebook resting beside him on the crib. The edges were frayed, the pages yellowed with time. It had been a companion of hers during the darkest days of her life, a place where she poured out her heart in letters to her unborn child, promises for a better future and words of love and hope. Each page held memories of sleepless nights on the streets, of the fear she had felt, the uncertainty she had lived with, and the quiet strength that had kept her going. The letters in the notebook had been her way of holding on to something, of keeping the connection with her child alive even when it seemed like the world had turned its back on her. Amara reached over, picking up the notebook with careful hands, and placed it gently on the crib next to Zubri. The weight of those letters was more than just the paper it was written on, it was the story of her struggle, her survival, and her love for him. She watched as Zubri's tiny hand moved slightly, his fingers brushing against the notebook as if he instinctively knew the significance of it. Her heart swelled with emotion. He had no idea what they had been through, what she had sacrificed for him, but one day when he was older she would tell him. She would tell him how much he had changed her life, how much he had saved her. But for now he was her baby and that was enough. As the sun continued to bathe the room in light, Amara sat in silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been wandering the streets, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her. The memory of the stormy night when she had gone into labor, alone and in pain, was still vivid in her mind. She remembered how helpless she had felt, how she had believed that she and her baby would not survive. But then, in the darkest moment, when she had thought all hope was lost, Zubri had cried out, his sound echoing through the streets, drawing people to her. That cry had been the turning point, the moment that had woken the world to her existence and to the existence of others who were suffering in silence. She had come so far since that night. From the cold streets to a safe room in a shelter, from desperation to hope. And though there was still much work to be done, much healing to be had, Amara felt a deep sense of gratitude for how far she had come. She had found strength within herself she never knew existed, and she had found a community that cared, a place where she belonged. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the faces of the people who had helped her along the way, the kind doctor who had delivered Zubri, the women at the shelter who had supported her, the strangers who had given her food and warmth. She thought of the charity gala, where she had spoken about her journey and shared her story with others. She had never imagined that she would be able to stand before a crowd, but now, looking back, she realized that it was all part of a larger story, a story of survival, of strength, and of the power of a community coming together. But the most important part of that story was Zubri, her son, her reason for everything. Her thoughts were interrupted by a small sound. Zubri stirred in his sleep, a soft coo escaping his lips. Amara smiled and leaned over to gently stroke his hair. He woke up with a sleepy yawn, his big brown eyes blinking open as he looked up at her. His gaze was filled with wonder and trust, a reflection of the love and security he had found in her arms. Amara leaned down and kissed his forehead, whispering softly, "You're my miracle, Zubri. You always will be." As Zubri smiled up at her, his tiny hands reaching for her, Amara's heart filled with a warmth she couldn't describe. He was her light in the dark, her reason for everything, and she would protect him with every ounce of her being. She stood up and carefully picked him up from the crib, cradling him against her chest. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft orange glow across the room. Amara moved to the window, holding Zuberi close as she gazed out at the world beyond. The streets that had once been her home, her battleground, now seemed distant, almost unreal. The world had changed, but it was still the same. There would always be people in need, always those who were struggling. But now, Amara knew that strength didn't always come from loud declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes, it came from the smallest of moments, the cry of a baby in the rain, the touch of a stranger's hand, the quiet resilience of someone who refuses to give up. She stood there for a while, letting the quiet of the room wash over her. The peace she had found was hard-won, and she knew it was fragile, but it was hers. And it was all thanks to the love and strength of her child, Zuberi. As she watched the sun dip below the horizon, Amara whispered one final thought, a thought that had carried her through the darkest times. Sometimes all it takes is a cry in the dark to wake up the world. And with that, Amara knew that no matter what came next, she and Zuberi would face it together.